Thank you for that, Olivia. Olivia is giving me this really intense singing up here. This group's got it going on. Y'all gonna have to get with it back there. Hey, I wanted to take a minute and just introduce Bill. I'm sure some of you know Bill. He is, I guess you've been in this community almost forever, except really cool stories Bill tells sometimes. If you have, maybe he can tell you a funny story today. I've heard stories about Hawaii and Africa and Fiji and I will tell you, and I think this is, I know it's true for Bill because he's told me, and I bet it's also true for Kay, although I don't know for sure. I think they would really like to go back to Fiji one more time. I think they left some really close believers back there that they would like to check on. Now it's been, I don't know how long it's been since Bill and Kay have been in the mission field, because I have known Bill and Kay since, let me do this in my head, 1992, when I went to preach at Cheap Hill is when I met Bill and Kay. I was actually, Diane and I were sitting on their porch when we decided that would be a good place for us to go, and that's where God was leading us. And I'm not really sure, but I still think they got my rocker sitting on their porch. They actually, they bought a rocker for Houston, I think, and it never got off of their porch. It's still there. I don't even get an invitation to go sit in the rocker, so maybe they're not as good friends as I think they are. I may need to rethink that whole speech. I don't know. No. Bill and Kay, they are truly for Diane and I. They have been very, very close friends for a while, and I mean, it's not they're not really family, but they're family. You guys know what it means when you have somebody that's close enough to you that they're just family. And so Bill and Larry Nash we were eating lunch together. It's been several months ago, and Bill and Larry are both elders at Pegram, and we sat down at lunch, and Larry looked over at Bill and he said, "Did we get enough money?" And they were debating, "Well, I don't know. I'm not sure we got enough money, and I'm not sure if we got enough what we need." And I said, "Well, y'all need money for it." And I said, "Well, we need money for a house in Honduras." I said, "Well, how much does a house in Honduras cost?" And he said, $2,500, right? $2,000. He said, "House is $2,000. I said, "We'll buy a house." He said, "You need to call somebody." I said, No, I don't need to call anybody. We'll buy a house. And I'm sure the elders are okay buying a house. And if they're not okay buying a house, I'll give them the money back. We'll buy a house. And he said, "Well, we wanted to build 3. We're not sure we got enough money, so we'll build a house." And then they got to talking and said, "Well, we do this thing called a food drop. We got to raise money for a food drop." I said, "We'll do a food drop." "How much is a food drop?" He said, $2,000. "We'll do a food drop." He said, "You need to call somebody?" I said, "No, we don't need to call anybody. We'll do food drop. We got benevolent money, food drop. Need food drop, we'll do food drop." So we ended up doing a house and food drop. And we showed you a picture of that. Bill's going to talk about it in a second. We actually, they dedicate that house to somebody, and we dedicated that house to Robert and Grace Lee. And really special. And so we're going to take this money that we collect, because you're going to give us enough money in the next 3 months through Children's Collection that we're going to build 2 more houses. You don't know that yet, but that's what I'm hoping, that when this is over, that we'll have enough money to build 2 more houses. And I didn't ask the elders about this, and I hope it's okay. I meant to ask them in the elders meeting, and I forgot. So if it's, I'll repent when this is over. But if I'm going to ask that we'll probably dedicate those 2 houses to Joe and Peggy Claude, even though Miss Peggy is still with us, and to Jim and Teresa Lee, although Teresa's still with us, because both integral parts of our congregation, and Jim had such a heart for helping people. So I want you to give enough money in the next 3 months that we can at least build 2 more houses. So get your checkbook out and keep the kids running. All right. And Bill's going to tell you about that program this morning. And thank you, Bill, for being here to do that.
Greg just told you a little bit more than I wanted you to know about our relationship, because now you blame me for bringing him to Cheatham County. It was indeed on our swing out on our screened-in porch that I think they came to a decision that they were going to come our way, and what a blessing that relationship at Cheap Hill, and the relationship that has done nothing but grown stronger and more precious throughout the years that we have known each other. We meet on a regular basis, or irregular, but we meet on occasions to have lunch, and it's always a sharing of shepherds at that situation, and we always enjoy the presence of each other. I'm a little bit reminded of a story where a minister always would gauge the length of his sermon by a mint. And he carried these mints in his pocket, and just as he was walking up, this come to mind because I just finished a cough drop. This came to mind. He would, as he's walking towards the pulpit, he would slip that mint in his mouth. And when that mint was completely gone, he knew it was time to wrap up. Unfortunately, on one occasion, he had mistakenly put a button that had fallen off his coat into his pocket, and he slipped that button in there, and they were in a real dilemma. I'm known for having issues like that, but I promise you I want to keep this short but sweet, because it is a sweet story. I'm telling you, I'm thrilled to be here. I know Kay is too. We've ate together, the most important meal, shared it together, and I think that hit home today. I'm a shepherd. That I have my hobbies as a shepherd, and one of them is rest. I'm known as the shepherd of rest because I encourage the congregation. I'm convinced that our society is an exhausted society of people, that we need to be practicing the Sabbath, however you want to term that, however you want to use it. And the other one is the communion. I'm convinced that that is solidly the reason that we gather. You've eaten together for years as friends. And it struck me this morning. I'm in a different place this morning. A little bit different situation. But I had a meal with you. I had the meal with you. And what a special feeling that gave me. Greg said, I'm home, and I feel at home. Our history goes back quite a while before Greg became involved with this congregation, about 53 years or so ago. I was kind of like Greg with the situation with these houses, and how all of a sudden, the Lord provided for us. I was at an event in the courthouse lawn. I think it must have been the elections, and Kay and I were prepared, having some difficulties getting out of the country into Liberia, West Africa. And one of your shepherds at that time came up and he said, I understand that you're going to become a missionary. And he said, if home folk can't support you, then something's wrong. And so this congregation became a part of other congregations. I didn't really anticipate the need, but it sure was a blessing for lots of reasons to have this congregation involved with us in our experience in Liberia. And later on, the same situation developed when we went to Fiji. And so we have a long-standing relationship. And now that relationship continues on just simply by what has happened already. You might not have known it, but some of your money went with us to Honduras. And I'll do my best to explain that and the blessings that have come from that. but we're not strangers in a real sense. The Torch Ministries was a new situation for me, and I still don't know exactly where the founding fathers of it came from. I know some of them. But we have a couple that have started worshiping with us about 5-7 years ago. And she has always been extremely involved in the Torch missions, in the house building projects, and as well as other projects in Honduras. And she's always wanted Kay and I, she knew of our interest in missions, and she wanted an elder to go see that work. We've supported her for a number of years, built a few, 4 or 5 houses now, and helped her raise money and so on for her own expense and for other issues. So this past year, I felt a load of guilt by being asked and considering saying no. So I said, I will go. It's a 10-day experience, at least it was for me. It can vary. But in that time frame, we constructed 13 homes. Torch Missions has been in existence for about 30 years, and it started by some men who had an interest in doing something somewhere, and they went to Honduras. And they saw the needs. And as a result of their efforts, Torch Missions was created. It's predominantly a organization that centers around the Christian colleges to the south, predominantly in Texas as well as Florida. A lot of young people were on the trip. Magnificent experience to be with them, but it's a multi-pronged ministry. The main thing is, of course, you think that it's the building of those homes. Those homes are kind of like a puzzle. They used to build them out of blocks. They had to make the blocks. And so it was a one-home construction, maybe, if they were fortunate and had the good weather and so on. And it has progressed to now where they have the availability at a couple of the mills to provide just basically a puzzle that is delivered on site. They get as close as they can. And it's a matter of falling in there and everybody doing their thing. And you'll have 20, 25 people working on this house. And really and truly, you don't get in each other's way because they do such a marvelous job of directing. You see some of those up above. In fact, I believe some of those were, that house, I believe, was one that we constructed this year, if I'm not badly mistaken. And each house is 18 by 20 or 20 by 20. It really depends upon the area that is available. Some 3,700 homes, over 37 homes now have been built. You do some math, the average, I asked, I said, well, what's the average number of people that will live in this 20 by 20, the largest house? And they said the average is 7. It's one room. You'll have a couple that normally have 4 children or so, and there's always a mother or a grandmother or a brother or sister or somebody else that takes up residence with you because housing is in such short supply. The women are phenomenal. Running them chainsaws and driving them nails and so on. You'd better just, back up and get out of their way. There is no distinction. Everybody does what everybody else does. And so, if it was up on the roof or wherever, they knew what they were doing. I was the newbie. And I just kind of stood amazed at what was taking place. If you take a home, and it's estimated that home will last 25 to 30 years, more or less. I saw homes that I think were pushing that we were at in a food drop. If you consider 7 people times 3 or 4 generations, the number of people that you have affected. It's not just 4, 5. It's 25. or more that you brought in out of the rain, and that's literally where they were coming from, is out of the rain, or someplace that they were infringing upon someone else for just some shelter. A number of people that have been affected by this ministry is enormous. And yes, that last home that we built, the average construction of one of these homes is probably about 5 hours, 6 hours. We built one in 3 hours and 45 minutes. That was the best we did that time frame. The one that we built in honor of Mr. Robert and Miss Grace took 3 hours and 45 minutes to get the post in the ground because we had to literally chisel granite. You know, to get, you have to have a good foundation. These things are on mountains. And you can't just sit them on top of the ground and expect them not to fall off because they would. So it varied greatly. But that house, I'm sure you've seen the picture of where yeah, there it is. That plaque is well attached. And I will tell you that in other arenas where I was at, in a food drop, in a house that had to have been close to 25 years or so, based upon the wear, the plaque, even though it wasn't readable, was still there. I expect God could still read it. I couldn't. So this will stand as an honor to Mr. Robert and Miss Grace for years to come. We built the houses, we had food drop. My most memorable, most enjoyable time was when we did a food drop in an Indian village, because I was able to get into conversations, no Spanish and no English, but we had conversations about farming and their maize and so on. And so I developed a close connection to these people, and I think they did with me as well in that time frame. Had quite a good little gathering around me as we were sharing our crops and sharing the word of God in the church and so on. And so it was a very memorable thing. It's a bag of food that lasts 1 to 2 weeks. And you may think, well, that's a small thing, just 1 or 2 weeks. But if you're living day to day, you've given somebody quite a boost. Maybe they can catch up. Maybe they can buy the children something that they need. Maybe they can get some medical attention. It may seem small, but to them it's an enormous situation. It's like the houses. It could change their situation entirely. We have medical clinics, treated several hundred. 3 different days they went out on medical treatment, medical clinics. I went with them because at Pegram, up until recently, what's happened in Haiti, we were doing a medical missions trip every year. And so I was interested in seeing how they did it, and a group of doctors from both Honduras and the United States fell in there, and they saw and helped a lot of people in that way. They had other things that was particularly designated for the children. There's a congregation here in Tennessee down towards Murfreesboro that funds a program where children in a poor part of town are fed breakfast and lunch. And so we went and helped with that. Just an amazing thing, these children coming and standing in line to get their meals, because it's quite likely that it was the only one they would have that day on many occasions. A wonderful experience. And what a blessing it was when we mentioned this in Greg's presence, and he took it and he ran with it. And I do hope that you'll be involved again. Personally, I'm not sure. As good as this program is, and I would highly, highly recommend it to any of you who wants a good, enjoyable, exhausting 10 days or a week or whatever time you would be able to stay. It would be an excellent organization to attach yourself with. They are well-grounded in Churches of Christ as their major supporters and so on. And so it's a group of Christians of mixed faiths, I will say, which makes it very interesting and encouraging and upbuilding, that come and work on this. I'd highly encourage you, if you're interested in doing something of that sort, this is a way to get in. All the mission trips I've normally gone on, I was at least partially in charge. And that puts an added burden upon you. But when you can just freeload on somebody else, it makes it far more enjoyable. I was in a bunk room with a 75-year-old who had lung cancer. The individual across the way from me was 68, and he broke his leg the second day we were there, and we had to minister to him. And a colonel that had retired just recently came for his son's sake, and he drove a iron rod through his hands, and the doctor, I'm up on the top bunk. It's the only one that was available. And the doctor came in and she said, if I were you, Bill, I'd find me another room. The most dangerous things, and when I felt the greatest amount of danger, was when I was getting in and out of bed. But it was a great trip. And, it just, when I was studying this last evening, I wanted to just kind of wrap it up and study a little bit about being a servant. If I were to ask you, that's the Lee House. That is definitely the Lee House. If there was one that had the people inside it, there was a widow, young widow, with 3 children, and her mother, who were going to immediately occupy this house. It was back in the middle of nowhere. We had to carry everything back there to get this house built. Quarter of a mile, and thank goodness for the endurance of Hondurans. They could just make it happen. So they were able to carry it back as quickly. Normally, that's already been taken back by the community to help. But in this case, because it was a last-minute add-on, it was handled a little bit differently. If I were to ask you where the greatest example of Jesus' service outside of the cross was in Scripture, I think many of you probably would think of John 13. This is where Jesus washed the feet. And I know that we in our group have a tendency to kind of, play it down a little bit. Other people take it very seriously, and they actually have ceremonies where they wash the feet of other Christians, other people. I don't mind washing someone's feet, and I'm not being negative towards them that choose to do so. But this is perhaps the greatest occasion that we have of Jesus serving. And understand, it's not because of what he did. I can wash feet. It's not a miraculous thing. What the magnificent point was being made was what Jesus became. That's the message. It's not what he did. It's what he became. He chose to become the servant, the slave. And there's 4 things here that I think we can learn from this passage that will make us better servants. I think it's the reason that Jesus was such a successful servant. And I'd like to cover those very quickly with you. It was just before the Passover. And it's Jesus, knowing that his time had come to leave this world and return to his Father. How many times do you and do I, in a day's activities, miss opportunities? Jesus knew that his time was near, that he was going to be leaving this world to return to his Father. Therefore, this event occurred. He knew his time was short. We need to learn, if we want to be servants, to grasp the opportunity. Now, talking about the opportunity, you may think, and we have a tendency to do this, that doing something big. But Jesus washed feet. Jesus said if you give a drink of cool water, you won't be forgotten if you do it in his name. Grasp the opportunities. Every day, make this a goal. Every day, an opportunity is going to come before you. It may be in your family. It may be that strong negative word that you want to use and direct towards your wife or your husband or your children. Grasp the opportunity. This could be life-changing. It could be family-changing. It could be church-changing. Grasp the opportunity. That's what Jesus says. Knowing that his time was near, I got to do this now. I have to teach this lesson now. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. This may sound a little bit strange to you, but Jesus loved his own. He loved people. He loved all people. I have known missionaries who really didn't love the people. Their reasons for being in the mission field were not pure. It was a situation where you had to do this in order to add to a resume, or to do this for some inner problem that you had within you. I've heard racial slurs in Africa. If you're going to Africa, folks, you better know that you're going to be dealing with black people. But Jesus loved the people. Over in Matthew chapter 18, the disciples come to Jesus. And I was going to do this differently. I asked Greg this morning, I said, what age group will be left? And he said, 5th grade down. And so I kind of changed, but I would love to have taken a seat right there and brought a first grader into my arms and the rest of the kids around me. And I'd like to ask some questions. The disciples came to Jesus and they said, who is the greatest? Who's the greatest in the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven? And I'd love to get the results from young people. If they are already influenced by us, we adults, their answers would be different than those in the first grade and kindergarten and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. If you could make yourself understood to them, their reasons for determining who is the greatest would be the kindness that's been shown to them. My daddy's great. My daddy plays baseball with me. Mama, we cook cookies together. Uncle Bob does this. Aunt Mary this. They haven't been damaged yet. You asked older individuals, young people and adults that have experienced the damage that we adults expose them to, they will become convinced that only the rich, only the powerful, only the famous, those are your great people. Because that's what they're learning in our society. They will learn to judge. racial, culture, age. And they will come basically to any decision in life with preconceived ideas. Preconceived ideas. I'm telling you, and I'm confessing to you, that one of the great programs that we have and have had for a number of years at Pegram is we work with Room in the Inn. That's where we take 12 homeless individuals, homeless men, every other Saturday night. We bring them into the church building. We have nice warm beds for them. We have provisions made for them for bathing, shaving, just grooming. We feed them very well. We send them on their way the next morning with a hot breakfast in their tummy and a bagged lunch. And I've been there many times. I'm one of the regulars that spend the night because you have to have individuals there with them. And so I've spent the nights several times, but I'm confessing to you that I sometimes have problems. I have problems loving some of those individuals because of the preconceived ideas that this world has taught me. Jesus would not have issues with these people. He may not agree with the fact that maybe some of them are taking advantage of things. I don't know. But I've listened to a lot of sad stories, preconceived ideas. The children would not have that. I know we've all heard lessons about why Jesus said, he took the child into his arms, I believe, and he said, unless you become like this little child, you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. You got to love those that you serve. If they're filthy, rags, they're black or they're brown, if their culture is different, you got to love those that you serve. And that's not an automatic. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas. Verse 3, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, and that he was returning to God. Jesus was able to serve because he knew who he was. Jesus knew who he was. He had no issues with getting down on his knees, wrapping himself like a slave, and washing the feet because he knew who he was. A lot of us think that serving diminishes us. It doesn't diminish, it increases us. We need to be teaching that, and we need to be feeling it. Serving never, ever will diminish you as a person. Jesus knew who he was, and therefore, he had no issues with doing what he did. And then finally, he came to Peter, and as we all know, Peter said, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus said, if I can't wash your feet, you have no part of me. And so Peter said, well, not only my feet, but wash my hands and my head as well. And Jesus said, if a man's taking a bath, he doesn't need his head washed. He doesn't need his hands washed. But walking here, he got his feet dirty. And so he needs his feet washed. And that's what I want to do, Peter. I want to wash your feet. So many people want to serve, but they want to choose their ministry. They want to choose what they do. Instead of doing the job that has presented itself, no matter how small or how large it may be. Jesus was the master servant. And I believe that in those short verses right there is wrapped up the reason why he was so successful. again, I hope, and I'm so very thankful that you have already been involved in the Honduran ministry. I hope that you will find the cause to continue. I hope maybe that some of you will go and see for yourself. I'm not necessarily associated in any official way with that organization, as I've said. I'm not even certain that I will go this year. It depends upon where I may be called elsewhere. Have some ministries going, and I can't go to all of them. I would love to go back on this one, and very well may, but it might not. But I'm encouraging you. You can go just about any time of the year because there's different groups going down at different times. But thank you so much on behalf of those Honduran families for the food that you put in their mouth, for the homes that you put them in, for the other ministries, and exposing Jesus to these people like he's never been exposed to them before. So thank you for that. And again, it's just been a privilege to be back with you and to share with you. I love you. God is moving in this group of people. The Spirit is here. And it's so evident with the prayers that were offered, with the service and the singing and such like. He even pointed to me of the nature of this congregation when Greg stopped us in the middle and gave us a lesson on clapping. But he didn't, he's not all hung up on this order of things necessarily or interfering with things, but he stopped us cold and then started us all over. I love that. Impromptu, open spirit instead of everybody wearing a mask. That's what I see in you.